In the heart of a luxurious French restaurant, a quiet yet powerful storm is about to unfold. When Jackie Chan, dressed in simple clothes, steps through the grand doors, he expects nothing more than a peaceful dinner. But from the moment he is seated, the air thickens with judgment. A waitress, her smile laced with arrogance, questions whether he even belongs there. The whispers grow, the tension rises, until a single moment changes everything. What happens next will leave everyone speechless. Watch till the end to witness an unforgettable lesson in respect and dignity. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. The grand restaurant La Lumiere stood as a beacon of luxury in the heart of Beverly Hills. It was a place where the elite gathered, where every dish was a masterpiece, and where wealth and prestige spoke louder than words. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed with its usual symphony of clinking glasses, hushed conversations, and the soft notes of a live string quartet filling the air. The golden glow from the chandeliers bathed the elegant diners in a warm, ethereal light. Through the revolving doors entered Jackie Chan, moving with a calm and composed demeanor. His posture was relaxed, his movements controlled yet fluid, as if every step he took was part of a carefully choreographed routine. Unlike the rest of the patrons, who were dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns, Jackie wore a simple yet neat outfit. A black collared shirt, comfortable slacks, and a pair of modest sneakers. To the unfamiliar eye, he looked like an ordinary man who had wandered into the wrong place. At the front desk stood Emma Carter, one of La Lumiere's senior waitresses. She had worked at the restaurant for years and prided herself on maintaining its prestigious image. With her sharp features, flawless uniform, and an air of refined arrogance, Emma believed she was more than just a waitress. She was a gatekeeper of class and sophistication. The moment she saw Jackie approach, her lips curled slightly in distaste. She scanned his attire, her eyes lingering on his shoes before flicking back to his face. He was Asian, and despite the recognition tugging at the back of her mind, she dismissed the thought. He didn't belong here. Before Jackie could speak, Emma raised a brow and spoke first, her voice dripping with condescension. "Good evening, sir. Are you sure you want to dine here?" Her question, though seemingly polite, carried an undertone of doubt, as if she were questioning his ability to afford a meal at La Lumiere. Jackie, unfazed, nodded with a polite smile. "Yes, I'd like a table for one, please." His tone was calm and pleasant, showing no sign of offense at her tone. Emma hesitated, eyeing him for a moment before letting out a small sigh. "Very well, but just so you're aware, this is a fine dining establishment. We don't serve casual meals here." She tilted her head slightly, as if expecting him to back away in embarrassment. Jackie's smile didn't falter. "That's all right. I'd like to experience it." Emma clicked her tongue softly but forced a professional smile. "Follow me, then." She didn't lead him to one of the elegant tables in the center of the restaurant, where the city's elite dined under chandeliers. Instead, she directed him towards the farthest corner, near the kitchen doors. The air was slightly warmer there from the constant opening and closing of the kitchen entrance. The noise of dishes clattering and chefs barking orders was more noticeable. "Here you go," Emma said, dropping a menu onto the table with a soft thud. "This should be suitable for you." Her fake smile barely concealed her disdain. Jackie remained composed as he sat down, unfolding the menu. He glanced at the listed items, his fingers gliding over the luxurious options. He knew what was happening. He had seen it countless times before. Emma leaned in slightly, her voice a little softer, but still carrying a condescending edge. "Would you like me to translate the menu for you? French cuisine can be complicated." Jackie's eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for the first time there was a spark of quiet amusement in them. "I can manage," he replied smoothly. Emma straightened but didn't leave just yet. Instead, she continued in a casual yet biting tone, ensuring those at the nearest tables could hear her. "We have cheaper options, too, if you'd prefer something more affordable." A few nearby guests glanced at the exchange, their curiosity piqued. Jackie, still calm, simply closed the menu and, in the heart of a luxurious French restaurant, a quiet yet powerful storm is about to unfold. When Jackie Chan, dressed in simple clothes, steps through the grand doors, he expects nothing more than a peaceful dinner. But from the moment he is seated, the air thickens with judgment. A waitress, her smile laced with arrogance, questions whether he even belongs there. The whispers grow, the tension rises, until a single moment changes everything. What happens next will leave everyone speechless. Watch till the end to witness an unforgettable lesson in respect and dignity. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. The grand restaurant, La Lumiere, stood as a beacon of luxury in the heart of Beverly Hills. It was a place where the elite gathered, where every dish was a masterpiece, and where wealth and prestige spoke louder than words. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed with its usual symphony of clinking glasses, hushed conversations, and the soft notes of a live string quartet fill in the air. The golden glow from the chandeliers bathed the elegant diners in a warm, ethereal light. Through the revolving doors entered Jackie Chan, moving with a calm and composed demeanor. His posture was relaxed, his movements controlled yet fluid, as if every step he took was part of a carefully choreographed routine. Unlike the rest of the patrons, who were dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns, Jackie wore a simple yet neat outfit: a black collared shirt, comfortable slacks, and a pair of modest sneakers. To the unfamiliar eye, he looked like an ordinary man who had wandered into the wrong place. At the front desk stood Emma Carter, one of La Lumiere's senior waitresses. She had worked at the restaurant for years and prided herself on maintaining its prestigious image. With her sharp features, flawless uniform, and an air of refined arrogance, Emma believed she was more than just a waitress. She was a gatekeeper of class and sophistication. The moment she saw Jackie approach, her lips curled slightly in distaste. She scanned his attire, her eyes lingering on his shoes before flicking back to his face. He was Asian, and despite the recognition tugging at the back of her mind, she dismissed the thought. He didn't belong here. Before Jackie could speak, Emma raised a brow and spoke first, her voice dripping with condescension. "Good evening, sir. Are you sure you want to dine here?" Her question, though seemingly polite, carried an undertone of doubt, as if she were questioning his ability to afford a meal at La Lumiere. Jackie, unfazed, nodded with a polite smile. "Yes, I'd like a table for one, please." His tone was calm and pleasant, showing no sign of offense at her tone. Emma hesitated, eyeing him for a moment before letting out a small sigh. "Very well, but just so you're aware, this is a fine dining establishment. We don't serve casual meals here." She tilted her head slightly, as if expecting him to back away in embarrassment. Jackie's smile didn't falter. "That's all right. I'd like to experience it." Emma clicked her tongue softly, but forced a professional smile. "Follow me, then." She didn't lead him to one of the elegant tables in the center of the restaurant where the city's elite dined under chandeliers. Instead, she directed him towards the farthest corner, near the kitchen doors. The air was slightly warmer there from the constant opening and closing of the kitchen entrance. The noise of dishes clattering and chefs barking orders was more noticeable. "Here you go," Emma said, dropping a menu onto the table with a soft thud. "This should be suitable for you." Her fake smile barely concealed her disdain. Jackie remained composed as he sat down, unfolding the menu. He glanced at the listed items, his fingers gliding over the luxurious options. He knew what was happening. He had seen it countless times before. Emma leaned in slightly, her voice a little softer but still carrying a condescending edge. "Would you like me to translate the menu for you? French cuisine can be complicated." Jackie's eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for the first time there was a spark of quiet amusement in them. "I can manage," he replied smoothly. Emma straightened but didn't leave just yet. Instead, she continued in a casual yet biting tone, ensuring those at the nearest tables could hear her. "We have cheaper options, too, if you'd prefer something more affordable," said. "I'll have the filet mignon rossini and a glass of red wine." Emma blinked. That was one of the most expensive items on the menu. A smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "Are you sure?" she asked, barely containing her sarcasm. "I just don't want you to be surprised when the bill comes." Jackie nodded, unfazed. "Yes, I'm sure." Emma rolled her eyes before scribbling down his order. As she turned away, she muttered under her breath, "I don't know what he's doing here. This isn't a restaurant for people like him." She walked off, shaking her head, and whispered to one of her co-workers, Jake, who was standing near the service station. "I swear, they always try to act fancy by ordering expensive meals. Just wait until the check arrives. I've seen this before." Jake, a kinder and more open-minded waiter, frowned slightly. "Emma, maybe he just wants a nice dinner. Why are you making such a big deal about it?" Emma scoffed. "Oh, come on, Jake. This is a French restaurant, not a Chinese takeout place. I'm just being realistic." Jake shook his head, but said nothing more. Meanwhile, Jackie sat patiently at his table, his expression unreadable. He had heard every word, not just from Emma, but from the subtle whispers of some of the guests around him. What is he doing here? Does he even know how to eat French food? I bet he's going to cause a scene when he sees the price. He had spent his entire life breaking barriers, proving that respect wasn't about race or status, but about character. Tonight, it seemed, would be another test. Jackie picked up his glass of water, took a slow sip, and smiled to himself. He wasn't leaving. Not yet. The tension in La Lumiere simmered beneath the surface as Jackie Chan remained seated in the farthest corner of the restaurant, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. The hushed whispers of nearby diners had grown, fueled by Emma's condescending behavior and the sharp comments she had deliberately made loud enough for others to hear. Some guests chuckled under their breath, while others merely watched in curiosity, waiting to see how the scene would unfold. At the service station, Emma leaned against the counter, chatting with Jake, her tone smug. "I gave him the worst seat in the house, but look at him, just sitting there like he belongs here. I swear they always try to prove something." She shook her head and let out a mocking sigh. "And he ordered the filet mignon rossini. Seriously? I bet he doesn't even know how to use a knife and fork properly." Jake frowned but didn't respond. He had worked alongside Emma for years, and while she was known for being sharp-tongued tonight, Her behavior was outright inappropriate. Another waitress, Sophie, who had overheard the exchange, muttered, "Emma, you're being cruel. He hasn't done anything wrong. You're treating him like he doesn't belong here just because he looks different." Emma rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. This is a French restaurant, not a Chinese street market. Maybe he should have gone somewhere more fitting." Sophie's lips pressed into a tight line, but she said nothing more, knowing Emma wouldn't listen. Meanwhile, at Jackie's table, the air around him felt heavy with unspoken judgment. As he casually glanced around the restaurant, his ears picked up snippets of conversation from nearby guests. "Do you think he even knows what he ordered?" one man whispered to his wife. "Maybe he thought they served fried rice and dumplings here," another guest chuckled. Jackie remained composed, his expression unreadable. He had spent his life facing prejudice, though it still never ceased to disappoint him when it reared its ugly head. He glanced toward the kitchen entrance where Emma was still standing, smirking as she spoke to another server. He knew exactly what she was doing. A moment later, Emma sauntered over, carrying a fresh menu in her hands. She placed it down in front of Jackie with exaggerated grace. "I thought you might want to take another look. We have some more affordable options that might be better suited for you." Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were sharp, waiting for a reaction. Jackie simply picked up the menu and skimmed it. "No need," he said, setting it aside. "I'm happy with my order." Emma let out a mock sigh, shaking her head. "Suit yourself. Just don't be shocked when the bill comes." Then, as she turned away, she deliberately muttered under her breath, just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "I heard they always try to haggle. Hope he doesn't make a scene." A few guests chuckled, but others shifted uncomfortably. Not everyone in the restaurant approved of Emma's behavior. At one of the central tables, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, a well-dressed older couple who had been watching since Jackie arrived, exchanged a knowing glance. Mr. Carter took a sip of his wine before murmuring to his wife, "That waitress is making a fool of herself. The man is handling this far better than she is." Mrs. Carter nodded. "She thinks she's humiliating him, but in reality, she's the one embarrassing herself." At another table, Lisa, a young businesswoman, leaned closer to her dining companion and whispered, "I can't believe she just said that. Does she even know who he is?" Her friend, David, shook his head. "I doubt it. She only sees what she wants to see." Back at the service station, Emma was still enjoying her private jokes with Jake when the kitchen doors swung open, and Chef Pierre, the restaurant's renowned head chef, stepped out. The room subtly shifted as the presence of the culinary master commanded respect. He was a man known for his high standards, his love for fine cuisine, and his intolerance for unprofessionalism among his staff. As he approached the counter, he spotted Emma and overheard the tail end of her conversation. His brows furrowed. "Emma," he called, his deep French accent cutting through the background noise. "What is this? I hear about you insulting a guest." Emma stiffened, her smug demeanor faltering. "Chef, I was just—" Pierre didn't let her finish. "I do not care what you were just doing. La Lumiere is a place of hospitality, not mockery. If I ever hear you speak to a guest that way again, you will be out of a job before you can say bon appetit." Nearby diners, who had been quietly observing the situation, let out small murmurs of approval. Emma's face turned red, but she forced a stiff nod. "Understood, chef." Pierre didn't acknowledge her further. Instead, he turned toward Jackie's table. With effortless grace, he approached and offered a small bow. "Monsieur, it is an honor to have you here. I hope you are enjoying your evening." Jackie smiled and nodded. "Thank you, Chef Pierre. I'm looking forward to the meal." Pierre placed a hand over his chest, his expression warm. "It will be magnifique, I promise." Then, without another word, he turned and strode back into the kitchen. Emma's hands clenched at her sides, her jaw tightening. She could feel the eyes of the other staff members on her, the silent judgment hanging in the air. She had been put in her place, but the humiliation burned deep. As she walked back to the service counter, her thoughts simmered with irritation. "Fine," she thought. "Let him have his little moment. But when the bill comes, we'll see who has the last laugh." Jackie, however, remained as unshaken as ever. He picked up his glass of water, took a slow sip, and smiled. He had seen it all before. This was nothing new. The real moment of truth hadn't arrived yet, but it would. Soon. The air inside La Lumiere felt thick with tension, though the evening carried on as if nothing had changed. The clinking of silverware and hushed murmurs filled the dining space, but eyes continued to drift toward the far corner where Jackie Chan sat, unmoved by the events that had unfolded. His composed demeanor seemed to frustrate Emma more than any verbal response ever could. She had tried to humiliate him, belittle him, make him feel unwelcome, yet he remained unshaken. That realization only deepened the irritation boiling inside her. Emma strutted through the dining area, attending to other tables with exaggerated politeness, ensuring her voice was loud enough for Jackie to hear. "Is everything to your liking?" she asked one couple sweetly. "We only serve the finest French cuisine, not something you can just find on the street." She cast a fleeting glance in Jackie's direction, her meaning clear. The guests she served glanced awkwardly at each other, realizing her passive-aggressive remark wasn't meant for them. The older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, had been quietly observing Emma's every move, and Mrs. Carter let out a small, unimpressed sigh. "She's relentless," she murmured to her husband. "I would have thought she'd learn by now." Emma returned to the service counter and crossed her arms. "I don't get it," she whispered to Jake, her tone a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "Why isn't he saying anything? People like him always try to prove something, but he's just sitting there. What's he playing at?" Jake exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Emma, maybe you should stop. You don't even know who he is." Emma scoffed. "Who cares who he is? He doesn't belong here." Sophie, the other waitress, finally had enough. "You're embarrassing yourself, Emma." Her voice was quiet but firm. "And if you think no one notices, you're wrong." Emma narrowed her eyes at Sophie but said nothing, instead turning on her heel and making her way toward Jackie's table, her irritation disguised under a forced, saccharine smile. With slow, deliberate movements, she placed the dish in front of him, a beautifully plated filet mignon Rossini, its aroma rich and enticing. But Emma wasn't about to let him enjoy it in peace. "I hope you know how to appreciate it," she said with mock sweetness. "This is a dish meant for refined palates. Not everyone is accustomed to flavors like these." She tilted her head. "But then again, you probably already knew that, didn't you?" Jackie met her gaze, his expression unreadable. He calmly picked up his fork and knife, cutting into the dish with precision. He took a bite, chewing slowly, before setting his utensils down and looking up at her. "It's excellent," he said simply. "Thank you." Emma's lips twitched in irritation. She had wanted a reaction, discomfort, embarrassment, anything, but Jackie gave her nothing. She let out a dramatic sigh, placing a hand on her hip. "You're full of surprises," she said, shaking her head. I was sure you'd ask if we had rice and soy sauce." She forced a laugh, casting a glance at nearby guests who were now fully aware of the situation. Some exchanged disapproving glances, while others shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with Emma's increasingly blatant hostility. At the central table, Lisa, the businesswoman who had been watching from the start, turned to her friend, David. "Did she really just say that?" she whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. "How is she still working here?" David's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but if the manager doesn't step in soon, this restaurant's going to have a PR nightmare." Nearby, Mr. Carter leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharp. "I think it's time we intervene," he murmured to his wife. Mrs. Carter nodded. "Yes, before this gets worse." Meanwhile, Jackie remained composed, his gaze unwavering as he looked up at Emma. "I appreciate the concern," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I don't need anything else." Emma clicked her tongue, clearly irritated that her remark hadn't rattled him. "Well," she said, her tone turning smug again, "just make sure you know how to use a fork and knife. Wouldn't want you struggling with something so foreign." Jackie's fingers tightened around the handle of his knife for a fraction of a second before he relaxed again. He had encountered this type of behavior before. People who believed they were above others simply because of where they were born, how they looked, or how they spoke. He had learned long ago that dignity and patience could be far more powerful than any outburst. "I managed just fine," he replied smoothly, his voice carrying just enough weight to make Emma hesitate for the briefest moment. Emma's smile thinned. "We'll see," she muttered before turning away, but before she could walk off, a voice cut through the room. "Excuse me, young lady." Emma froze in place, her expression stiffening as she turned to see Mr. Carter rising from his chair. The elderly gentleman adjusted his suit jacket before leveling a piercing gaze at her. The room quieted as other diners turned their attention toward the unfolding moment. "I don't usually involve myself in other people's affairs," Mr. Carter said, his tone polite yet firm, "but I must say your behavior tonight has been disgraceful." Emma's face burned. "Sir, I wasn't finished," Mr. Carter interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding respect. "This man has shown nothing but grace and patience, while you, on the other hand, have made a complete spectacle of yourself. And the worst part?" He shook his head. "You don't even realize it." Emma's hands clenched at her sides. "I was just—" "No," Mr. Carter said firmly, "you weren't just anything. You were rude, unprofessional, and blatantly discriminatory, and I think it's about time someone held you accountable." A murmur of agreement rippled through the restaurant. Lisa, emboldened by Mr. Carter's words, raised her voice. "He's right. She's been treating him horribly since the moment he walked in." David nodded. "I was going to stay quiet, but this is beyond inappropriate. Someone needs to call the manager." A few other diners murmured in agreement, their collective disapproval growing. Emma, for the first time that evening, felt her confidence waver. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the doors to the kitchen swung open once more, and out stepped the restaurant manager, Mr. Thompson, his sharp eyes sweeping across the dining room. He had clearly been listening, and from the look on his face, he was not pleased. Emma's heart pounded as she realized that whatever happened next, she would not be able to talk her way out of it. Jackie, still seated, merely picked up his glass of water, took a slow sip, and waited. He had known from the beginning that the moment of truth would come. And now it had arrived. A heavy silence fell over La Lumiere as the restaurant manager, Mr. Thompson, stepped into the dining area. His sharp gaze swept across the room, taking in the tense atmosphere, the murmuring guests, and most importantly, the expression on Emma's face, one of barely concealed panic. He had seen enough from the service counter to know that something was very wrong. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he approached Jackie's table, his expression one of composed authority. Emma instinctively straightened her posture, attempting to feign innocence, but her flushed cheeks and stiff stance betrayed her. Mr. Thompson stopped beside Jackie's table, offering the martial artist a respectful nod before shifting his gaze to Emma. "Emma," he said, his voice low and controlled, yet carrying a weight of disappointment. "Is there something you'd like to explain to me?" Emma opened her mouth, scrambling for a defense, but no words came. The weight of the restaurant's attention pressed down on her, and for the first time that evening, she realized just how many people had witnessed her behavior. Mr. Thompson didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he turned to Jackie, his expression immediately shifting to one of sincerity. "Mr. Chan," he said, "I sincerely apologize for any mistreatment you've experienced tonight. This is not the standard of service we uphold at La Lumiere, and I take full responsibility for what has happened." Jackie, who had been calmly watching everything unfold, set down his glass and met Mr. Thompson's gaze with unwavering composure. "I appreciate your apology," he said, his voice steady and kind, "but I think the real question is, does she understand why this is wrong?" Emma flinched. Jackie's words weren't loud, nor were they laced with anger, but they carried a quiet authority that cut deeper than any reprimand. She swallowed hard, feeling the judgment radiating from every table in the restaurant. Mr. Thompson turned back to Emma, his expression expectant. "Well?" he prompted. Emma hesitated, her pride warring with the undeniable reality of the situation. She cast a quick glance around the room, noting the way diners, some of whom had once been amused by her antics, now looked at her with clear disapproval. Even her colleagues, Jake and Sophie, avoided her gaze, their silence a louder condemnation than words could ever be. I didn't mean any harm," she finally stammered, though the excuse felt weak even to her own ears. Jackie raised an eyebrow slightly. "Didn't you?" His voice was still calm, but there was something in his eyes that made Emma feel small, exposed. Lisa, seated a few tables away, let out an unimpressed scoff. "Oh, come on," she muttered to her friend. "She's really going to play the 'I didn't mean it' card after everything she said?" David shook his head. "I think she's finally realizing she can't talk her way out of this one." Emma clenched her fists at her sides. I just didn't think." Jackie leaned forward slightly, his expression patient but firm. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "You didn't think. You saw someone who didn't look like the usual guests here, and you decided they didn't belong. You judged me before you even knew who I was. And if you're treating me like this, I can only imagine how you treat others who don't fit your idea of who deserves to be here." Emma's face burned with humiliation. She had thought herself in control of the situation all night, but now she stood utterly exposed, the weight of her actions crashing down on her. Mr. Carter, who had been watching with a satisfied yet measured expression, finally spoke. "Young lady," he said, his deep voice commanding attention, "what you did tonight wasn't just rude, it was disgraceful. This man, whom you deemed unworthy, has conducted himself with more dignity and grace than you have all evening. And now, when confronted, you deflect instead of taking accountability. That's not just poor service, that's poor character." A murmur of agreement spread through the restaurant. Emma felt her pulse hammering in her ears. Mr. Thompson exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose before looking back at her. "Emma, I expect every member of my staff to treat guests with respect. No exceptions. You have not only embarrassed yourself, but have embarrassed this establishment." He paused before adding, "Do you have anything to say?" Emma bit her lip, knowing that no excuse would save her now. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she muttered, "I'm sorry." Jackie studied her for a moment before nodding. "I hope you mean that," he said simply. Mr. Thompson straightened his jacket. "Emma, I'll be speaking with you after your shift." His tone made it clear that this would not be a simple conversation. Emma's shoulders slumped in defeat. She nodded stiffly before stepping back, feeling the heat of every pair of eyes in the restaurant on her. Jackie turned his attention back to Mr. Thompson. "As I said before, I appreciate the apology," he said, "but this isn't just about me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else." Mr. Thompson nodded. "You have my word, Mr. Chan. This will be addressed." A beat of silence followed before Jackie picked up his fork again, signaling the conversation was over. Slowly, conversations in the restaurant resumed, though the mood had shifted. La Lumiere would never be quite the same after tonight. Lisa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Wow," she whispered to David. "That was something." David nodded. "And I don't think that waitress will ever forget it." Emma, still standing at a distance, felt the sting of those words. She turned away, knowing that her reputation, both as a waitress and as a person, had just taken a hit she might never fully recover from. The tension in La Lumiere lingered long after Emma stepped away from Jackie's table. Though the restaurant's patrons slowly resumed their conversations, the weight of what had just transpired was impossible to ignore. The sharp clinking of silverware and the occasional murmur filled the air, but every now and then glances were still cast in Emma's direction. Jackie, however, remained as calm as ever, continuing his meal as if the confrontation had been nothing more than an afterthought. Emma stood near the service counter, her hands gripping the edge as she stared blankly at the rows of pristine glassware stacked neatly behind it. Shame curled in her stomach like a heavy stone. Never, in her years working at La Lumiere, had she been publicly humiliated like this. The way Mr. Thompson had reprimanded her in front of everyone, the way Jackie had exposed her behavior without so much as raising his voice, it had shattered her sense of control. But more than anything, it was the way the other guests had looked at her that stung the most. The judgment in their eyes, the whispered words of disappointment, and worst of all, the realization that she had done this to herself. Jake, standing beside her, hesitated before speaking. "Emma," he said quietly, his tone unreadable. She didn't turn to face him. "What?" Jake sighed. I don't get it. Why did you act like that? You had no reason to." Emma finally turned, her expression defensive. "I was just doing my job," she muttered. "We have standards here, Jake. Not everyone fits them." Jake frowned. "Standards? Or your own assumptions?" Emma opened her mouth to argue, but found no words. The truth was, she hadn't even thought about it. Not really. She had seen Jackie, seen his casual attire, his foreign appearance, and she had decided in an instant that he didn't belong. She had spoken down to him, made assumptions about his wealth, his culture, and even his ability to understand the menu. And now, standing there, feeling the eyes of the entire restaurant still heavy on her, she realized just how ugly that made her look. Lisa, who had been watching from her table, finally stood up. With quiet determination, she walked toward Jackie's table, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Stopping beside him, she cleared her throat gently, drawing his attention. Jackie looked up, offering a polite smile. "I just wanted to say," Lisa began, her voice steady, "that what happened tonight was completely unacceptable. And I hope you know that not everyone here shares that kind of ignorance." Jackie's smile remained, though there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, "but I already knew that." Lisa nodded, glancing briefly toward Emma, who was still by the service counter, her face partially hidden by her hair. "Some people need to learn the hard way," she murmured. Jackie didn't respond right away. Instead, he picked up his glass of water, taking a small sip before setting it down gently. "People make mistakes," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's what they do after that matters." Lisa exhaled slowly. "I hope she realizes that." Jackie gave a slight nod. "We'll see." Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson had disappeared into his office, clearly needing a moment to process everything. The other staff members kept their heads down, silently going about their work, pretending not to notice the aftermath of the evening's events. But there was an undeniable shift in the air, an unspoken understanding that things at La Lumiere would not return to how they were before. Emma's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to leave, to disappear before Mr. Thompson inevitably called her into his office for the conversation she knew was coming. But she also knew that walking out now would only make things worse. So instead, she forced herself to move, grabbing a tray and heading toward a nearby table as if nothing had happened. But as she passed by Jackie's table, she felt his gaze on her. Not cruel, not mocking, just steady. She swallowed hard and kept walking. At the end of the night, as the restaurant emptied and the lights dimmed, Mr. Thompson finally emerged from his office, his face unreadable. He gestured toward Emma. "Come with me." Emma's stomach twisted as she followed him into the back, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. Emma followed Mr. Thompson into his office, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The dim lighting cast shadows along the wooden walls, making the space feel even smaller than it was. She stood near the chair opposite his desk, but he didn't offer her a seat. Instead, he folded his arms and stared at her in silence for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but there was no mistaking the disappointment beneath it. "Do you understand what you've done tonight?" Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. I didn't mean—" Mr. Thompson held up a hand, cutting her off. "I don't want excuses. I want to know if you truly understand." She hesitated, her mind racing for something to say, some way to defend herself, but she found nothing. Finally, she lowered her gaze and nodded. "Yes." Mr. Thompson sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "This restaurant has a reputation, Emma, not just for its food, but for the way we treat people. We are in the business of hospitality. And tonight, you represented the opposite of that." Emma felt the sting of his words, but she knew he was right. Still, the weight of humiliation settled heavily on her chest. It wasn't just about losing her job. It was about the fact that she had been so wrong, so blind to her own prejudice. She'd always prided herself on working at La Lumiere, seeing herself as someone who upheld its prestige, but now she realized that the prestige she clung to had been nothing more than her own arrogance. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk. "You disrespected a guest. Not just any guest, but Jackie Chan. Do you even realize how embarrassing this is for us as an establishment?" Emma flinched. Of course, she knew now who Jackie was, and that only made everything worse. The world-famous martial artist, actor, and philanthropist had come to their restaurant, and she had treated him like an unworthy outsider. But even if he had been a regular person, she knew now that what she had done was inexcusable. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Mr. Thompson didn't respond right away. He studied her, his sharp gaze searching for something, maybe sincerity, maybe regret. After a long silence, he exhaled heavily and sat down. "I should fire you," he said bluntly. Emma's stomach dropped. She had expected this, but hearing it out loud made it feel so much more real. "However," Mr. Thompson continued, "I believe in second chances. If I thought you didn't care, this conversation would be over. But I saw your face back there. I saw the moment you realized what you had done." Emma lifted her gaze, surprised. "You're not firing me?" Mr. Thompson shook his head. "Not yet. But there will be consequences. You are suspended for 2 weeks, unpaid. And when you return, you won't be on the floor. You'll be in the back, assisting the kitchen staff. You need to understand what it means to serve people. Truly serve them without judgment." Emma's breath caught in her throat. The back? That was the lowest position in the restaurant, often given to new hires who had no experience. It was humiliating, but at the same time she couldn't argue. She didn't deserve her old position, not after tonight. She nodded slowly. "I understand." Mr. Thompson leaned back, watching her for a moment before speaking again. "And before your suspension starts, you will personally apologize to Mr. Chan." Emma's eyes widened. "What?" "Right now. He's still here. You will go to his table and offer him a sincere apology. No excuses, no justifications. Just an apology." Emma's stomach twisted in knots. Facing Jackie again after everything felt like an impossible task, but she knew there was no way out of it. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay?" Mr. Thompson gestured toward the door. "Then go." The walk from the office back into the dining area felt like the longest walk of her life. The restaurant was nearly empty now, save for a few lingering guests and the staff finishing up their duties. But Jackie was still seated at his table, sipping tea with a quiet, unreadable expression. Emma hesitated at the edge of the room, taking a deep breath before forcing herself forward. When she reached his table, she felt the weight of his gaze as he looked up at her. For a moment, she thought about running. Instead, she forced herself to speak. "Mr. Chan," she said, her voice tight, I want to apologize for how I treated you tonight. It was wrong, and I'm truly sorry." She couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes, but she could feel the silence stretching between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was as calm as ever. "Do you know why it was wrong?" Emma swallowed hard. "Because I judged you. Before I even knew you, I made assumptions and I treated you unfairly." Jackie studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "That's a start." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Emma blinked, confused. "What?" "Sit," he repeated. She hesitated before slowly lowering herself into the seat. Jackie poured another cup of tea and slid it toward her. "Drink." Emma hesitated again, then picked up the cup with both hands. She took a small sip, the warmth spreading through her. Jackie leaned back, watching her. "You know, I've met a lot of people in my life. Some good, some bad, and some who just don't know any better yet. Which one are you?" Emma's grip on the cup tightened. "I don't want to be the last one." Jackie nodded. "Then don't be." He set his own cup down and stood. "Good night, Miss Emma." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, his calm demeanor never wavering. Emma sat there, staring at the untouched tea in front of her, feeling something shift deep inside her. She didn't know if she deserved a second chance, but she knew she had to try. What happened tonight was more than just a dinner. It was a lesson in respect, dignity, and the power of standing up against prejudice. Jackie Chan didn't have to raise his voice or fight back with anger. Instead, his patience and wisdom spoke louder than words, leaving a lasting impact on everyone in that restaurant. Moments like these remind us that true strength isn't about power, it's about character. What do you think about this story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story.